2025 is going to be even more exciting in terms of like truly scaling the DA throughput.
Are you expecting significant demand increases for Celestia Blockspace?
Celestia will be certainly far ahead of what like someone like Ethereum will ever probably be able to ever provide.
It's when, not if, there's more transactions driven by AI agents than humans.
That's the level of scale that we want to get to next year.
Welcome back to the Rollup, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners. Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain. With the introduction of SafeNet, Safe is taking this to the next step very soon. Check out net.safe.global to learn more about how Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain. All right, welcome to Bangkok once again, Nick. It's good to have you. John, good to have you back. Last one for the day. So yeah, how you feeling, Nick?
Feeling pretty tired, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But it's been a whirlwind and lots of fun events and great people as always. I feel like DevCon is usually the highlight of the year in terms of like technical conferences. So
yeah, there's no token 2049 fluff here. No shots taken, but you know we like the research KOLs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, me too. It makes two of us.
1 year after, or a little over 1 year from Celestia's mainnet, around this time, 21 chains live, 150 gigabytes posted to Celestia. 45% of DA market share, which I think is actually somewhat misleading. Maybe you can kind of like give some insight there, exactly what that means. But broadly, like how are you feeling about the growth and the overall kind of reflections of your past year?
Honestly, I've been really pleasantly surprised at how quickly the ecosystem has grown. And I'm really proud also of the engineering accomplishments and the roadmap that we published. And something most recently that I think is the most exciting thing is the Mammoth mini testnet, which sort of showcases that some of the first implementations of some of the roadmap engineering milestones we have planned. And it just shows how quickly we can scale the block size. So I think 2025 is going to be even more exciting in terms of like truly scaling the DA throughput. But yeah, in terms of the ecosystem adoption, I think like given that it's been 1 year, I've been like pleasantly surprised at how quickly things have picked up. We've had, the first sovereign rollups launch, like Forma, most recently Flame. We've had, a whole sort of like native ecosystem that's about like on the cusp of kind of like coming out. So Eclipse recently launched their mainnet. And I think like altVM season is going to come very, very soon and consume that block space, which is why we're kind of laser focused right now on scaling the throughput. But I think like even though we're at 10% utilization, I feel like that could like very quickly, especially if this bull market really takes off, quickly get saturated. So
bullish.
Yeah, I'm bullish as well. I mean, there's one element where bull market brings in a lot of new users, like a lot of transactions as a result of like new incomers that maybe only kind of come around like in bull markets. But one thing we were talking about earlier was this advent of AI agents that are interacting on chain over the next like couple of years that, I mean, in my opinion, will dominate block space and transactions. Because to me, it's a matter of it's when, not if, there's more transactions driven by AI agents than humans. And I think that is where we really need abundant block space and high throughput, because I mean that they operate at an entirely different level as like relative to human transactions. So,
yeah, and I think that we've had this like oversupply of block space, which we were kind of talking about yesterday, but like it feels like that quickly can change, like the narrative's been like there's too much block space. We don't need more chains. We don't need more rollups. But I think that all it takes is a couple apps and that changes quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like this happens every cycle where it's like oh, we're never going to need so much block space or scalability. And then there's a bull market. And then it's like, oh, shit, we need like an exponential like increase in the capacity of blockchains. And I think like this cycle is going to be no different. And I think hopefully Celestia can be there to actually like, supply the market with the block space that it needs, rather than hitting these scale fails, which you always seem to hit in previous cycles.
I mean, suppose Celestia does get filled up and like utilization goes from 10% to like 80, 90, 100. What, like, I guess what happens is maybe too broad of a question, but like, the goal is to just continuously increase block size. So would it just mean like, okay, like we've validated, we've reached utilization of our current capacity. It's just time to like we're on the right path. Just continue to forge ahead.
I mean, well, as like any blockchain, when the blocks fill up, then you start having a fee market that develops. And Mustafa tweeted about this recently, where
So
there's a lot of FUD about like the fees on the Celestia being too low, and if you think about it, I mean, people said the exact same thing about Solana, that it would never be economically sustainable because it's like too cheap. And I mean, every blockchain starts out where you have fees, not actually to make money, but to serve as a sort of like DOS resistance mechanism. Mm-hmm. And so Celestia's block space is essentially free right now. So looking
by
at
design.
By design. Yeah, like I mean, if like Bitcoin or Ethereum, I guess if Ethereum maybe is a little bit different with 1559, but like if the block space is not full, then the fees like go down and shrink, potentially basically to like a very, very low baseline. Mm-hmm. So anyway, if the blocks do get saturated, then a fee market would develop. Now, the goal of one of the design goals of Celestia is that like we don't want to we want to avoid congestion where possible, where we don't want to like price out actual users just trying to do normal things on chain. We don't want to repeat like CryptoKitties and like Ethereum style congestion. That's a lofty goal. I mean, especially, like some people think like, Totally is always like, oh, I pray that my competitors build for infinite demand or whatever like that. But like, I truly think that of course, that like, there's not going to be infinite demand for block space, but there's going to be a huge amount of demand for block space. And so we're trying to build for that future. And I think, the goal is like not to have crazy fee spikes, but like it's okay if a fee market develops, but hopefully we're like low enough that the like average user transaction is still extremely cheap to the point where users are not feeling it, and apps are not incentivized to migrate because they're like paying. It's not meant to be extractive. Like the way that I think about it is that you can charge for block space up to the amount of the value that it is contributing to those, like giving out to those applications or those users. And where that price is, we don't actually know. And I think it depends on a bunch of different factors, but it's definitely not zero. And as long as you're charging, so if you're charging that amount, at some point, if you exceed that, then it's like, okay, I'm an L2, I'm a user, whatever, I'm rationally going to migrate somewhere else, right? And I think we saw that initially when Celestia launched, before 4844 came online, and the call data fees were just incredibly high. It was like kind of a no-brainer for a lot of different teams to migrate to Celestia. It was sort of like a offloading mechanism where it's like people were literally saving millions of dollars in fees.
Avo and Manta both.
Yeah, exactly. And now that's no longer the case because of 4844, which is great.
But now Ethereum blobs are getting filled. They're at 80 or 90%.
Yeah. But I think, I think blobs realistically the price will go up, but I think it's irrevertibly like they've made it significantly cheaper, and I think it'll stay. I don't think hopefully it'll never get back to like call data back in the days of prices, and I think they have a scaling roadmap. But where Celestia is today, so by the way, the Ginger upgrade, which is hitting testnets now basically, and will hit mainnet, I think sometime in December, is drops our block times from 12 seconds to 6 seconds. So we get double our throughput and reduce latency. kind of similar to IBRL in Solana, increased bandwidth, reduced latency. But and within that also, there's a capacity to increase the block size from 2 megabytes to 8 megabytes. So in total, with that upgrade, we can 8x our throughput.
Yep.
So, and I think if I have the numbers correctly, I think that is basically already the dank sharding target throughput. I could be wrong, but I think it's close, like in that ballpark.
And then they're gonna stop there.
Sorry,
Is Ethereum gonna stop there?
no, definitely not. But I guess what I'm saying, what I'm trying to illustrate is that like Celestia is already almost there.
Okay.
And then again, that's not even touching on Ginger is like has like very little of the actual real roadmap shipped. And what you can look to as a telegraph of where we're going next is Mammoth, which we've implemented something called Vacuum, which is similar to like the sort of DAG based consensus protocols like Narwhal and things like Tusk, the things that Sui and Aptos use, in that it decouples the propagation of transactions, like the mempool, from the consensus. And there's also something called compact blocks, which is originated from Bitcoin. Anyway, what it does is it just like massively makes the protocol more like bandwidth efficient on the consensus side, which means we can scale the block size like 150x almost, if we can hit those numbers on mainnet. This is a closed test net, so all fairness, I've criticized other projects for publishing data or like metrics on a closed test net, so take it with a grain of salt. But like that's the level of scale that we want to get to next year.
Yeah.
And I think that like, I mean, if we have like 30 megabytes per second of DA bandwidth, I feel like that's a lot. That's I think over four times the throughput of Solana today, if not potentially more, especially if you consider you can like do compression and other clever things with rollups to consume less DA than like, I guess the way that Solana might do their transactions. So
A lot of amazing upgrades coming from after 1 year, just in the next couple months, and I want to touch more on kind of the vision of the fees being related to TIA a bit later on. But I just want to give John a chance to kind of, from an outsider's perspective, looking in on the growth of Celestia, what's been some of your key takeaways and just broader thoughts on the development of this alternative DA market as a whole, and specifically on Celestia?
Yeah, no, I mean, the last year has definitely been impressive to watch, and really do like the direction that the roadmap is going. Like, definitely seems to be a like very clear focus on like, you guys like very clearly know like what the end game is, like how exactly do we need to architect Celestia in reflection of that. And so I think it's pretty clear. I mean, that like Celestia will be certainly far ahead of what like someone like Ethereum will ever probably be able to ever provide, both on like the ultimate kind of end game scale that you'll provide, but also like time to market of that, of like obviously Ethereum, these other chains, like they have to move a lot slower. So as of right now, I mean, like it's not completely filled up yet. I mean, like the main interesting thing to me to see now is, okay, like seeing the actual use cases that are like popping up and kind of using it. And so, I mean, like obviously that takes a while. And a lot of the new stuff that you're starting to see now is where you're starting to see the early signs of like, okay, there are like a lot of cool, unique things that like, this is kind of the default place you go. Of like, hey, I just want to launch a chain. I want it to be cheap. I want it to be easy to use. Like if you guys are starting to get those, like that's a really good sign. And I've started to see that. I mean, like cool stuff. Like I know that you know well, and like we work with now is like a team like Pay.
Yes.
Stuff like that is like genuinely like one of my favorite things that I've like seen in crypto in a long time. Like this is just like one of the obvious use cases that we've like wanted to see for a long time. It is a chain dedicated to doing private payments, which is like the most obvious thing that like we know crypto is awesome at this thing.
Yep.
And what do they not want to worry about is like having cheap infrastructure in the background. And so they will end up using Celestia, and so stuff like that. I mean, getting 100 more of those, 1,000 more of those, 1 million more of those is like what you want to start seeing for the years to come. But I mean, everything tracking well so far.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up Pay, because they're my favorite like crypto app I've ever used, and I'm just
genuinely the same.
So thrilled that they're. I mean, I used it last night. I use it all the time. I love onboarding people to it. It's insane I swear to God, when you use pay, you cannot be bearish on the future of like actual consumer applications because it is that smooth. Like you just download the application, never store your seed phrase. You can onboard money with Apple Pay in literally like 5 seconds, and then you generate a ZK proof and like can send it to anyone, and it's like just like private digital cash right there. It is seriously mind blowing, and like, and I had another experience, which is that I just recently changed phones, and I wiped my old phone, and then I realized I was like, oh fuck. Like I opened pay and it was all blank, and I was like, shit, I fucking like deleted my private key or whatever, and then like 5 seconds later, like my balance popped up, and it's because they have a iCloud backup,
A passkey.
and like yeah, and I was just like, holy shit, so like I like never even have to think about my private key,
Yep.
not once.
Yep. Yeah, we saw that with Infinex as well. I think that the general crypto app sphere is moving towards Face ID, passkeys, and then, I mean, we can't discredit what Pay is built on the actual app itself.
Yeah.
With Celestia underneath of course. I think that's like the first iteration of like a really, really solid consumer app on Celestia. And then now we have Eclipse live.
Yeah.
And I think I put out a tweet that was like, Fuel Network went live, Eclipse live yesterday, Anisha tomorrow, quote unquote. Not
Soon.
not
Be
financial
patient.
advice. And then Movement, next week, right? And
Yeah.
so what are you thinking about like with this like altVM expansion for Celestia and for the broader modular ecosystem as a whole? Are you expecting significant demand increases for Celestia Blockspace?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, when Eclipse went live, obviously with virtually empty blocks, the amount of like DA that they needed was massive.
Yeah.
Because they have 400 millisecond block times, and they're just stuffing the blocks like directly, the headers directly on Celestia. So that adds up very quickly. But just taking a step back before we get into Eclipse and stuff, I just want to like Pay, for example, and Eclipse and these altVMs are both like applications that I feel really only make sense on Celestia because, well, like the like Pay itself needs to be an app chain because in order to enable their privacy, they need to like have a UTXO based like execution model. This is very similar to Zcash. So like they're not just like another L2. They're like a purpose built. They're like one of the best examples of a true app chain. And like why I hate having these arguments of like with totally of like, oh, anything you could just build on, just a smart contract. You just have to make it whatever their token extension bullshit thing. And it's like, there's just certain things you can't build within like the confines of a predefined virtual machine.
Yeah.
Like, try building Pay on SVM. Go for it. Have fun.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, like, and then also like if they want to be a consumer app, so there's another like thing that, Celestia stands for, which is this like unstoppable applications notion. And like what that means is we want to build applications that are like they won't be stopped by several different things. One, they're unstoppable from a scalability perspective because like yeah, you could have built a payments app like Pay, and then you start onboard, it goes like vertical hockey stick growth, and all of a sudden like you just max out and you can't even, your infrastructure can't support it. Or it's private and I don't know, or like some government or someone tries to block you and like censor you or whatever. Like you're built on a chain that is censorship resistant enough to ensure that you're not going to get shut down. And also it's like verifiable by end users. So it's like this incorruptible, like we want to, like what that's always been the vision of what Celestia is supposed to be, is like this security, incorruptible, like security layer on which you can build, things that are extremely powerful and like kind of deliver on the original vision of crypto. And like private payments is one of those. And then all VMs are similar because they just need a shitload of throughput.
Yeah.
And like there is nowhere else that you can go today, right now, to build. If you want to have a Solana on, and again, actually, I hate, I don't know, I'm mentioning totally so many times, but, he also
Letting
means,
it all out today. Eh?
he means, I love the guy, by the way. This is not a throwing
Vic's
shade
been
at
creating some enemies recently
No,
on
he's not.
Twitter.
There's
This guy's getting a little spicy.
there's no enemy. I genuinely actually love Toli and Solana as a project.
Yeah.
I'm seriously
lucky with
very aligned. But he's just good at trolling. So like his other troll move is like oh, well, just make Solana a roll up on Ethereum, right?
Yeah.
Just post all the Solana data on Ethereum. And obviously the joke there is like, it's just so far from being possible. But, so it's like kind of like proving his point of like, anyway. But the thing is like with Celestia, you could potentially do that. And that's why, and only a Celestia, and that's why Eclipse, for example, and all these high throughput movement, Initia, building on Celestia, like, makes sense and is like why we're enabling that. Like without that, if you try to build Eclipse on Ethereum blobs, you're screwed.
Yeah. So Eclipse, movement, and then Initia with I think like maybe 8 rollups to start or 6 rollups, maybe more,
They
maybe
claim
10.
15.
Yeah, I know. I'm
Yeah.
just giving them a little conservative guess here. So are you expecting? So we have the Ginger upgrade, which is going to quadruple the block size.
8 times.
8 times. Okay.
But
So
4 times the size of the blocks, but also half the block time.
right. Okay. And so are you expecting? I mean, I'm sure you can't give like exact ideas here, but like, what kind of demand jump are you expecting from those 3 in the next like 3 to 6 months?
Dude, I have no way to predict that.
Yeah, okay.
Because
Fair
I mean,
enough.
dude, it depends on so
Silly
many different
question.
things.
Yeah.
Well, just what was the jump that you saw when Eclipse went live? You said that they were stuffing the block headers into blocks.
It was probably a 50% increase. But again, like,
50%.
well, from the baseline.
Yeah.
So like it went from 5% utilization to like 10%.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I see.
so
Okay.
that was pretty significant. But again, like claiming like credit for that or whatever, or making that seem like a big deal is a little bit of a misnomer because it's like it's just empty blocks. You know what I mean? So it's like
Right.
we're not, it's not something that we want to like go out there and be like, oh,
Right,
look
right.
at this. But like Eclipse recently went live for actual users, and I think hopefully they're going to be launching more applications. I mean, I know they will over the coming month, and so hopefully, and they're going to start like rolling out liquidity and points, and I believe so. Like, there's going to be, I think, an influx of users.
Okay.
And so that's going to be exciting. And I mean, also, all of this is like contingent on. I think Movement and Initia equally have extremely exciting go-to-market plans where I think there's going to be a ton of users and liquidity and all that stuff. It's going to be a very exciting time, but it's also very dependent on the bull market because like this whole industry is so cyclical.
Yep.
Like people want to come and speculate and farm airdrops and stuff like that when the market's up and the people care all of a sudden again. Whereas like in a bear market, it's a ghost town. And
So before we get into some of the more security and technical stuff, I just want to give you a chance to chime in on any of that kind of Solana trolling and how it relates to what Nick's saying.
No, I mean it's definitely all fair, and totally is very, very good at trolling. But yeah, no, I mean very concretely, I mean like that is why Eclipse is built on top of Celestia and not on top of Ethereum, at least for DA. And like disclosure, we're obviously Eclipse investors. That was the obvious choice when they were making it. It was like, okay, we see that Solana is great. We also have a strong view that Ethereum L2s are great. Like we want to be able to scale ETH the asset, provide those kind of users with more scalable execution. But what is the best option available? It is Celestia DA. That is going to be the most scalable thing. Erdi is now and is likely to continue to be so in the future. So that is the obvious thing. And yeah, I mean those initial stats were just from like their developer mainnet, but like they're effectively like empty blocks. And now they finally launched their real user mainnet just a few days ago. So hopefully we'll start to see those order of magnitude increases now. Now that like real apps and real users are all going to be there. But yeah, trying to project like what is the even like midterm state of like how many transactions are like Eclipse and all these other altVMs going to be doing is like, is it 100, is it 1,000, is it 10,000 TPS? Like I just like
A man's just trying to be bullish over here,
So as those orders of magnitude start to compound and TIA utilization starts to increase and we have all these rollups go live and that contributes to the utilization going up, what are the network of like what is the value accrual thesis to TIA, the token? What is
So I think before we get into that, one last piece of the roadmap that I think ties into this whole question really well as a prerequisite to cover is Lazybridging, which is essentially ZK accounts. And the reason it relates to this is like ZK accounts are, so as people listening may or may not know, Celestia does not have smart contracts or applications. You can't build, a bridge on Celestia L1. There's IBC support, but that's like quite limited. And so there's a proposal to add this feature called ZK verification feature to the state machine, so that you can actually build like bridges and other, like basically it gives you the functionality of having smart contracts, but without adding a full state like execution environment and without adding additional state.
Could I ask you to clarify something real quick? Just because Celestia's like big thing is build whatever. So how do we like why? And I think, I mean, you're kind of getting to like why bridges weren't possible but are going to be possible. And so like what I guess is are there other limitations to build whatever, or are we removing those limitations and kind of like really letting build whatever proliferate? I guess like you were starting to explain. I may have interrupted you, but why was bridging not possible?
Yeah, so I think build whatever is already possible for the rollups themselves, in the sense of like they have full stack customizability and they have all this throughput to play around with. But build whatever is not really true on the Celestia base layer, because we made this opinionated choice of like we don't, Celestia is meant to be as minimal as possible on the L1. But then that came with these really kind of crappy trade-offs. And I feel like even John may have been one of the first like vocal critics or pointing out like this is really bearish that Celestia can't have canonical bridges and can't bridge TIA up to its ecosystem in a trust minimized way, right? And so that very much limits like what you can do with TIA the asset in the long run. The interesting thing is like there are ways around that the ecosystem is already doing. Like when Forma, this like NFT chain launched, it's a sovereign rollup. It's not like settling anywhere necessarily. It doesn't have a direct bridge with Celestia, but you could bridge TIA there almost instantly by doing IBC to Astria and then up. So that's sort of like one, like there's ways around it essentially, but the ideal end system is like you have a canonical bridge directly from the rollup to Celestia and back. And without, right now, because there's no smart contracts, there's no way, you can go up, but you couldn't ever come back because the Celestia needs to be able to verify what's happening on the rollup. And without some kind of ZK verification thing, it can't do that.
Right, and you can't have ZK verification because there's no smart contracts.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you could implement a verifier in like a smart contract, but we can't do that.
Okay, but with Lazybridging, we can accomplish a canonical bridge.
Yeah. So ZK accounts, one of the things you can do is have a canonical bridge for TIA to your rollup. Then kind of like the cool thing is that what you can build around that as a base primitive. So like Celestia has IBC. IBC is now expanding into almost every other L1 ecosystem. So Celestia can have a IBC bridge to everything in Cosmos, obviously, also to Ethereum L1, to Solana. I don't know about Bitcoin. I feel like there are people working on that. But like the idea is that Celestia L1 can bridge everywhere outside of the ecosystem, and then be kind of this
through
place,
IBC.
Yeah, and then through that, those assets can be routed through ZK accounts into those rollups. So then when I deploy a rollup, I can very seamlessly tap into the whole like as much liquidity as like Celestia itself is connected to. And then also vice versa, where the more rollups that are plugged in here, they're now only like sort of one hop away from each other. And you can build out, a whole kind of interoperability ecosystem there, including solving and intents and things like that, around that to make it a very, like the goal, as it always should be, is to have like a user experience and a developer experience that is like monoliths. Like, let's be honest, like it's a huge advantage for anyone building or using Solana that they don't ever have to think about what chain they're on. And so like that's the end goal. Obviously, there's a lot of work to get there, but we think that this like feature of ZK accounts and sort of like this like Lazybridging North Star is sort of how we start to move the Celestia ecosystem towards that user and developer experience. And it's lazy in a bunch of different ways. Like it's lazy for the users because they don't have to like worry about where their assets are and like deal with the overhead of like, hop, or, connecting their wallets to all these different things. It's lazy for the developers. Like when you deploy your rollup, you just need one bridge, and then you're kind of set. And then it's lazy from the base layer perspective, where you, as a base layer, is not really doing much work. Like, it's not trying. I think that's kind of where we disagreed with this notion of settlement. Is like, don't overload the base layer with state and execution, or even we don't even want to be the asset issuing layer where because those assets should be sovereign to wherever they originate from, right? And like TIA is the only asset that should be sovereign on the Celestia base layer, and everything else should live wherever it lives, but it can be routed through that path if it's helpful. I mean, there's also a world where maybe it's just direct bridging between all these ecosystems, and that's also fine too. But one point I would make there is that in order to have, and this is one of the baseline to me network effect about data availability and consensus, that if you want to have trust minimized bridging in the long run, you need to share a common consensus and DA layer like Celestia.
Mm-hmm. And so pre-Lazybridging, you had sort of these siloed rollups that were using Celestia underneath for DA, but you couldn't really tap into that liquidity because you didn't have that canonical bridge. Mm-hmm. And so the network effects to TIA were sort of bottlenecked, there was limitations to those network effects because you didn't have the interconnectivity between that network of sovereign rollups. But now with a bridge, we've been talking about monetary velocity a lot today, and now with a bridge, you have you have a faster monetary velocity because you have more interconnectivity. You can take these routes, go between these one another, access applications quicker, move that liquidity between these rollups quicker. And so all of this leads to faster rehypothecation and faster value accrual from users being able to kind of navigate the TIA ecosystem at a greater speed.
And just TIA everywhere as well, right? The ability to have the TIA token in different rollups in the initial ecosystem and on Eclipse. I think it's already there. I was seeing some of your posts there about TIA DeFi. So with these ZK accounts then, with regards to Rob's kind of initial question and what John and Tarun and I were going on about ETH and Sol is what is the right mental model then for thinking about TIA, the asset? How does this post-ZK account future change the way we can think about using TIA and valuing TIA as far as accruing value from the ecosystem itself?
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet. Bridge your tokens and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fraxtal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity.
Redstone modular oracles are available on 50 plus chains, trusted by over 100 clients and over 6 billion in total value secured. Visit redstone.finance to find out more.
I want to hear John's take.
Yes,
and then I'm happy
That's what I
to
figured.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I mean, I'll start with the fees thing because that's where it started before. To your point of a lot of people will criticize now, Celestia doesn't have any fees, or at least not a very meaningful amount. You could say the same thing of Solana, a couple years ago, and look at them now. The main important distinction I would definitely draw between the two is there is a fundamentally different business model of something like Solana or Ethereum versus Celestia, where most of that fee revenue for something like Solana is being generated because that is a shared state machine where the majority of what people are paying is for they want priority access to a piece of shared state. So Celestia currently is not going to have, for example, like any MEV generally going through the base layer because that's going to be captured at like whatever are the L2s, the execution layers there. So it is more of just a pure like resource cost of, what am I willing to pay to Celestia for, X amount of bandwidth, replicated by, Y amount of nodes. As opposed to something like Solana where it's like, hey, I want to capture this arbitrage. This is worth $1,000 to me. I will bid 999 of that, to the proposer. So there is a fundamental difference there, and there is like a reasonable argument that something like DA, which there are a lot of people who argue like this is effectively just a commodity that I was describing of like, I'm paying for bandwidth, times X number of nodes. The cost of this thing over time should fall to whatever is literally like the cost to run those boxes, some reasonable multiple, maybe we charge like 2x the bandwidth cost or whatever. Versus the other side is like priority access to valuable state should be a pretty like fundamental thing that, people are always going to be willing to pay for that. The difficult part there though is that like that in some sense is also not entirely fundamental to the L1 in that like you are starting to see, what is every application trying to figure out, even if they are on a shared state machine, is like, all right, but how can I keep that for myself?
Yeah.
And whether that's running an off-chain auction or chains experimenting, with priority ordering and MEV taxes such that we could return to them. All these apps want to capture that, whether they're on a shared state machine or they have their own chain on top of a DA layer. So there's definitely pressure on both to do that, to try to drive down the costs of whatever I'm paying to the L1. They are trying to drive it down to, I want to pay the L1, like literally what are the resource costs that they are providing to me. So there is pressure on both of them. And if that does start to play out in that direction, I mean, what you see is, how do you make money? You need a shit ton of scale. We need to do 1 million TPS and, charge a small multiple on that. That is kind of where it ends up. It is so hard to project that for the reasons of like what we were describing earlier of like, how many TPS is Eclipse going to do in a steady state? I don't know. Is it 10? Is it 100? Is it 1,000, 10,000? What does that look like now versus 5 years from now? The same thing is true for these base layers. I can reason about like how many times I'm going to use Uniswap in a day, but like I can't reason about, how many bots and AI agents are going to be using these chains, and like, are we doing 1 million TPS on Celestia, or do we need like 1 trillion TPS? Like that obviously changes the economics that are going through it a ton. So that's the very like simple, I would say like literal cash flow part of it is like, honestly, we just got to wait and see kind of how it shakes out. The part that would change that is, and this is what gets to kind of like the bridging stuff, is like that kind of implicitly assumes that this is an entirely fungible resource of like, okay, if Celestia is causing me, charging me like 3x the bandwidth costs, and then someone spins up like Celestia 2 over there, and like they're going to charge me 2x bandwidth costs, like why shouldn't I just go over there? The reason why you wouldn't do that is if there is some meaningful level of like lock-in and network effects on like Celestia 1 instead of Celestia 2. And that comes from, am I locked into that because I want to get, seamless trustless interoperability with the other chains who are in this ecosystem. And if that's the thing that's providing that to me, well, I can't get that at least as easily if I'm over on Celestia number 2. So that is why it ends up becoming important to do that kind of thing. And that is why, you start to see people get into this like, oh yeah, we want to be in the middle of being, providing that sequencing and bridging and coordination for all these other chains, because that's where actually the network effects are. And I think this is something that Ethereum is starting to realize a little bit now. And which is why I've been pushing this a lot on the Ethereum side of, I think that there is like finally started to be a realization like, hey, even if we are just doing the whole L2 thing, and even if you didn't care about the L1, one of the things that I think that you fundamentally should care about is we probably want to reduce the block times, have single slot finality, such that like you are actually the coordination layer, coordinating or interop between these chains, because like that's actually a meaningful network effect. Versus if you're just like pushing that coordination to another layer. And then the third part in the economic, this gets to what we're saying like with the ZK bridging of you can actually do interop with all these other chains that are on a shared DA layer like Celestia today. Like you could just have 2 Celestia rollups that are just peer-to-peer. Bridging with each other. What you can't do is you can't bridge the T of the base asset up, at least in like a trust minimized way. And so adding this minimal functionality of like, okay, how can we verify on the base layer allows you to have this kind of 2-way bridging between all the chains, and like that allows the base asset to go out and be used in all these chains in like whatever arbitrary way is, does it end up taking on more utility, monetary like qualities? Possibly. Like, does it end up starting to be used in DeFi in places like Flame and Eclipse and those? Like, very possibly. And so having that functionality should increase it a lot, at least the ability to do so. It really ends up mimicking a lot what we actually, the exact same thing that we see in Bitcoin right now. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin. It's like pretty much the same conversation of like, should we, adding ZK accounts to Celestia is the same conversation of like Opcat and CTV and all these different things on Bitcoin. It's like, it's the same idea of like, we have really minimal L1 and we want to get this asset BTC like up to these rollups in a trust minimized manner. What do we need to do? What is the minimal functionality to get the L1 to be able to verify something that's happening off chain? And so we're all building the same thing. It's ending up in the same place. Increased bandwidth, reduced latency, and ZK. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. A few things. One is like, we're not really building the same thing because every time I talk to a lot of people, they say what you said in your first point, which is like, oh, well, the only DA is a commodity. The only valuable thing is like priority access to state, MEV, blah blah blah, all these things like Samani. I hear that from him like literally all the time, and I believe that belongs to the applications, does not belong in the L1, and it's silly to try to own that long term. Like the smart move is to go where the puck is going and realize like that value belongs to the people who are using that state or like creating that state. Like Solana doesn't own, like if everyone's trying to like trade on Radium, like it's Radium and the community that they've built and the liquidity that they've built that is what is like valuable and where that MEV and priority access is like coming from. And none of that necessarily needs to exist on that one. And if the incentives are there and it's possible, they're going to want to capture that for themselves. So like, I just feel that like one way or another, that stuff like exits L1. And so I think they're building with that assumption. And like Celestia is like, we're past that. Like we're looking way, way, way down the line for like the long-term end game. And then the second question becomes what your second point was, is DA a commodity or not? Right. And I strongly believe that it's not a commodity. I mean, even just like if you step back for a second and you think about like to me, I think people think of data availability maybe because of the way it was marketed as like some sidecar thing that's not actually essential to chains. But a DA and consensus layer like Ethereum or like Celestia is the same thing as an L1 with smart contracts, except instead of having smart contracts, those smart contracts are now rollups. And instead of having you don't have this atomic composability, but you have this trust minimized composability, which I think is actually more important in the long run than atomic synchronous composability. And if you stray from that security zone that is in this shared DA and consensus layer uniquely provides, you lose that like zone of security. You lose that ability, that privileged access to interoperate with those chains or those applications. Like let's just stop even like distinguishing between a smart contract and a rollup. They're just applications, right? It's application and security models. And like those when you look at it that way, those two models are identical. And yet no one like thinks about like, oh, well, why would I build on Ethereum versus on, some other Ethereum copycat? It's like, oh, because all the other applications are there. Like that's where all the security is. And that's like the ecosystem that I want to be adjacent to. Right. And so, it very much has network effects at that level. Then when you bundle things like Lazybridging with that just inherent sort of like technical foundation of like you need to be on a shared consensus and DA layer for this privileged interop, and then it starts to become even more and more sticky, and then a network effect becomes even stronger because it's not just like the base wherever I post my data. It's like I'm literally like routing my liquidity and like sort of like accessing all my liquidity, and like that's like that's my entry point to everything else. And then there's another side of it of why I think that DA is not a commodity, which is light nodes and just verifiability itself. There's two angles to this. One is that why is it that we can even build this blockchain that has 27 megabytes per second of data throughput, which is absolutely mental, and not call it just a Amazon, just like S3 instance, like is because there's data availability sampling. But the only way that data availability sampling works at scale is if there's enough people running these light nodes for the like trust assumptions to work out. And so in parallel to, and actually we should have mentioned this earlier, but like if we were to try to get to 27 megabyte, like the mammoth throughput, we're going to need a ton of light nodes rolled out, like actually have a truly decentralized network that is like actually making this whole thing secure and not just some centralized like thing that the Bitcoin big block debate people would just like laugh at and be like, you call this a blockchain? This is bullshit. It's like 100 nodes, like, and no one has any ability to verify this thing.
There's 5,000 nodes in India.
Yeah, you're right.
What the hell's going on over there?
Mumbai is really holding it down for us. But anyway, my point is, and like it takes, like, okay, so how do you actually get those light nodes? The light node quote build out is like integrate. Well, we're working. That's another part of our roadmap, making it extremely easy to embed the light node into wallets and applications directly. So like in Pay, you will have a light node actually like running in the background verifying everything, right? And that's also your, again, to show it a little bit more, like you don't need an RPC. Like you're actually it's like a truly peer-to-peer app. I should have mentioned that. It's part of this unstoppable thing.
Unstoppable,
it's like
yep.
You don't have middlemen and intermediaries. It's like it's actually what blockchains were supposed to be. Like that's what Bitcoiners used to all run. I mean, some of them still do run full nodes. Ethereum Mist browser was like a full node, and you synced everything, and that's how you interacted with the chain. And then then we went down the path of Infura because like it was convenient and like there was no actual way to scale that. But like Celestia brings us back to that original vision. Anyway, the light node build out is crucial, and that is something that you just fundamentally can't fork. You can't just be like, oh, I'm forking and I'm gonna build, like, now my light node is gonna be integrated and deployed in all these applications and front ends and browsers and whatever. Like they're running a different protocol, so they're not gonna, oh, now I'm gonna run 2 nodes. And and that's also like a user distribution network of like, I'm a user. Also, like it might be possible that like a user's not going to run a separate Celestia light node for every application. There could be like one light node on your phone that's maybe embedded there, and through that you're verifying all these different apps that you're using. So anyway, it's just like that is something that is like so fundamentally sticky in my mind. And again, also if you forked and you want to have crazy throughput, you don't, now your chain is just centralized AWS.
Yeah.
So like these two things run in parallel, and like, anyway, it's just like so clear to me, DA is not a commodity. I just wish everyone would shut up.
I think a couple points to add on to that. So I think it's fair to say that a sufficiently decentralized data availability a blockchain focused on data availability and consensus that is minimalistic and has a sufficient set of light nodes and actual validators, also which has interoperability baked in via ZK accounts, is not a commodity for all the reasons that you said. Now, I think that where that comes from is from systems that look more like data availability committees. And so I think that data availability committees are much more ripe to be commoditized because they don't have these effects. And also like designs that look like that are also more ripe to be commoditized. I don't know if you had something to add there. You look like you were jumping on.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say I think that actually ties in well. I think a lot of the debate of is DA a commodity. I in some meaningful sense do agree with it because I think it comes down to like effectively a semantic debate of what do we talk about. I think in some meaningful sense DA, like raw DA, is a commodity in that like, if what am I willing to pay these 100 nodes to provide me DA,
right,
versus like all else equal, it's literally the same. Say it's literally the same 100 validators running this thing.
Yeah.
To me, that's like no difference if you are taking that on its own. For example, the example of like something like Eclipse, where effectively Celestia is primarily just effectively acting like a data availability committee to them, where that is like they are not just a native rollup, but that is trying to mostly trustlessly interop with a bunch of other Celestia rollups. They are primarily an Ethereum L2 that is like using an off-chain DA. From Ethereum L1's perspective, like Celestia 1 versus Celestia 2, like they're the same thing. It's another committee that's telling them this thing. So in that kind of like literal sense, DA on its own is a commodity. To them, like there really is no difference if someone spun up Celestia 2, they'd probably go use the thing if it was cheaper. It's the other things that kind of get bundled with it that make it not a commodity. Like in some sense, I think raw DA is a commodity, and I think like shared coordination is not a commodity, and like that is what you actually end up getting concretely with if I'm using Celestia as a rollup where the sequencing and the coordination and the bridging and is all of that is done through here, then to me that's not a commodity, because if I go to Celestia 2 over there, then I don't get that anymore. So it depends on kind of the use case and what you are actually using it for. Ends up being like whether this thing is fungible or not.
So I strongly agree with that take, but the way that I would frame it is slightly different. That so every rollup has to choose its home. Like, what is its security zone that it cares about and wants to be home? And for Eclipse, in some ways, like, it is basically Ethereum. Like, they are settling to Ethereum. Like, that is their quote home. And so, and any DA source that is external to that is a commodity. So off-chain DA or altDA from the Ethereum, rollup or L2 view is a commodity. So, but like rollups that choose, for example, Celestia as their home, it is not a commodity to them. In the same way that Ethereum DA is not a commodity to these Ethereum rollups. That's why, like, Arbitrum, I don't think they're ever gonna use altDA.
No,
because they're just like, they're not willing to compromise. There is no second best. There's only Ethereum DA for those rollups. And like in Celestia, there is a unique ecosystem that is emerging for which they feel the same way about Celestia DA, and that is really like what matters. And that's why like EigenDA or any trust or these things that only aim to be this off-chain DA product are commodities and just not interesting. Like I don't even.
Well, they provide a service to the market of very cheap, high throughput data.
Yes, for the specific. Well, they don't really do that yet.
But AnyTrust does.
AnyTrust does, yes.
Yes.
But like, again, they're providing a sort of like, it's off-chain DA.
Yeah.
And it's just, and it is almost by definition to me like a commodity.
It is less secure than a Celestia, but there's the Orbit chains use AnyTrust because it's native to Arbitrum.
Yeah.
It's like an alignment thing.
Yeah, I think it's also just cheap and super
It's just
scalable,
easy. Yeah.
like, and it works. It's just more than you can say about other DA solutions. But I will say there is actually some, the off-chain DA is not fully a commodity, like, and actually this actually brings us to the DABeat dashboard.
Yeah.
Which
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, really stoked because I was talking to the L2Beat guys like a year ago in Istanbul. And I was like, you guys should think about doing a DA sort of like dashboard. And they built it. They went through a lot of iterations of different like risk frameworks and things like that. And I think they arrived at a really good product. And I think it's so important because like DA is such a difficult subject to actually reason about for the average user. And anyway, the DA dashboard is basically oriented around like Ethereum, like. What is data availability? What are these data altDA options? What is their security from like an Ethereum centric view? And the cool thing is that like they're very much not a commodity in the sense of like you have to worry about how much value is staked and how much value is like securing those bridges, because if there's like more value secured than is staked, you start to kind of have this imbalance where like it becomes profitable to attack. There's things like how secure is there fraud detection, so like data availability sampling, which Celestia has, and like AnyTrust or EigenDA does not have. There are things like how secure is the committee, how secure is the bridge,
Relayer failures, verifiability,
and well, no, the last one is basically like a delay, like upgrades, and like how is a upgrade to the bridge like managed, and so anyway, like those are all I think those are the most important things to keep in mind. And I think even within that, if you look at the DABeat dashboard, like there's no sort of like Celestia is by far the leader even for off-chain DA. So
there is no second best right now. I put out that tweet. I was like, it's going to be interesting to see what this looks like in 6 months.
Yeah,
because Veil will have rollups, EigenDA will have rollups, and Celestia will go through its upgrades, and it'll start to get more green on that. And it's gonna be, I'm stoked for that dashboard. It's gonna be like the L2Beat of DA. I mean, that's literally what it is. I mean,
sort of, but again, like it's the L2Beat of off-chain DA, right? Yeah, exactly.
Rollups.
So it doesn't really tell the full picture of like what really matters to me, which again is the native ecosystem.
Yeah. So we had this podcast just kind of close out back on kind of like the TIA valuation and thinking about how to value TIA. We had this podcast with Justin Drake and asked him about Ethereum valuation, which I'm sure that either you guys watched or have heard a lot. And we thought we got to the end game of like where Ethereum is going to generate a ton of value, and it's somewhat similar to Celestia's end game in terms of like a ton of rollups using Ethereum for DA, charging a small fee at like 100 million TPS future environment, and Ethereum generates something like I don't know, some billions of dollars over a year, right? Which may or may not justify a multi-hundred billion or $1 trillion valuation. And so Ethereum's like, well, we kind of have to get some store of value monetary premium into this, or else how are we going to reach, 1 trillion, 2 trillion, 3 trillion? And so like from the lens of TIA, knowing that we're trying to scale to 1 gigabyte blocks and basically have a economy of scale operating with full blocks at 1 gigabyte, what is the difference between in that future the mental model of fees and revenue for TIA, the token, and for the TIA ecosystem versus like TIA as an entrenched monetary premium asset? How are we kind of like positing these two sides of the coin for TIA the asset? And John, I think you
I'll
can
let
start
John go
again,
first.
I mean, I think the really short answer is none of us honestly know.
Okay.
I think we can all take like, I think we can have some reasonable degrees of confidence, ideas about like what we think is going to happen, but honestly, none of us know. I think is the really short answer. I still find it challenging to at least assess at any high probability for any of these things that they will end up with enough, revenue or whatever we want to call it, fees generated to justify these types of, $100 billion, $1 trillion valuations. I think that is incredibly unlikely for most, if not all, protocols that exist. And so that ends up in that scenario of, if this thing is going to be valued, it probably ends up looking like some, non-sovereign store value type thing, which is, exactly what Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're all trying to do, which is, I mean, theoretically, there is no limit to like what this thing could be worth. It's certainly possible in the long run, certainly like the biggest protocol, if one thing like whether it's Ethereum, Celestia, Solana, whatever, let's say that thing like really is the thing and it's hosting like most of crypto on it. It's certainly foreseeable like that thing is going to generate a shit ton of revenue, that it will be in the many billions of dollars per year. But that world, even if that does happen, I think has a lot of embedded assumptions, is very, very like orders of magnitude far away from where we are actually right now. Because if you look at where we are like actually right now, is Ethereum and Sol are like, they're the two most like profitable things. And I mean, they're running at like currently a run rate of like, we'll call it like $1 billion-ish a year of like real economic value, like a mix of like fees and MEV that are happening right now. And really, most of that, I would say, is a byproduct of what we were talking about before. Like, frankly, these systems are just inefficient, and a lot of that is leaking to the base layer that just like shouldn't be leaking there. So especially once you bake in these assumptions of like, okay, 90% of that value that's going to them right now, like most of that's going to start going back to the apps. Even the marginal amount of congestion that these things are charging for, even for DA, that's mostly going to go away because there's going to be Celestia. They're going to scale even more. There's going to be Veil. There's going to be EigenDA. Like the minimal baseline cost of these things should get driven down a lot. So you're going to need some insane scale in the TLDR.
You are.
And like reasoning about these like orders of magnitude outcomes, I think is like actually impossible. And so what we can empirically say is, Bitcoin is worth a lot because people really want a non-sovereign store value. And I think that there's like a very reasonable fight for, there might be a handful of those types of assets in the long run. And the other ones, if there are other non-sovereign store value crypto assets like that at like a meaningful scale, they're probably going to be, what are the base assets of the largest, most successful protocols, whether that's, the base layer for all the rollups if we end up in that world, or, the largest, like more integrated chains if we end up with a handful of integrated chains. It's probably going to be the base asset of like those dominant platforms.
I don't really know either, but right now there's more than a handful. Like Sui.
You gotta be joking.
It's got a ton of monetary premium. There's no fees, there's no tokens, there's no revenue.
Yeah, but I think that's a sign of the times, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll call that more speculative or meme premium than monetary premium.
But meme coins are an interesting example, right? Of
They
like,
are.
And like people say meme coins don't have any fundamentals. Like they do have fundamentals. Like it's just because like this is a social technology, and like building a community of people who believe in your coin like as a meme. That's literally like Bitcoin is just a meme coin.
Yeah,
like it
the
is a
first.
meme coin.
So is fiat.
And I don't mean that in a derogatory
Except
way
soft-chain.
at all.
Yeah.
They have had just the most successful meme, which is the digital gold. And they have an amazing origin story with this Satoshi,
Yep.
and they're the original. Like Bitcoin is synonymous with cryptocurrency and with this whole movement. Like a lot of people don't even know. Like when I say, "Oh, I work in crypto or whatever or blockchain," they're like, "I don't know, is that like Bitcoin?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's
Do
like
you work
Bitcoin."
for Bitcoin?
No, but I'm obviously very bullish on Bitcoin.
It's a good meme.
Anyway, so just to touch back on John's points, I think totally agree in terms of like there will be monetary assets and like non-sovereign store of value type assets. I think there's a high likelihood that those will correlate strongly with the protocols that get the most usage and adoption. I think there's just kind of maybe it's a meme, or maybe there's a more fundamental reason why those tend to start to emerge as money within those ecosystems. But I also think, and I also think that there's on the revenue side, the two variables that matter to me, which are very clearly unknown as of right now, are the total demand to transact on chain, like how much DA demand will there be, and the second one is how strong are the network effects around like these DA, like these L1s, the DA consensus layers, and because that determines the pricing power, right? However strong that is like how high can the fees be before people are like, okay, peace out. I'm like, this is ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
which we've seen on Ethereum before. I tend to be very bullish on the DA demand. Like, I think it's going to be absolutely massive. I feel like we're in the like late 90s equivalent in the internet, and like we just haven't seen anything. Like there's no users because there's no applications, but like there will be things like pay. Like we're gonna reach a point where it's like that's no longer gonna be a question. And I think that like if you really have internet scale use of blockchains, we have AI agents, whatever your thesis is, like there's gonna be a lot of demand. Like I'm just extremely bullish like on the total aggregate demand. And then obviously for the reasons I mentioned earlier, I think there's very strong network effects around these L1s that will give them some pricing power. Where that is, I don't know specifically, but I think I land at a place that's much higher than the average person. And then when you put those two things together, like that's a absolutely massive amount of revenue. And so I think that that's a very plausible that could be true, is my position.
Yeah.
And I think, in terms of, I'll just stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that most of these non-sovereign store values will also grow to have this like strong revenue that keeps like the fundamental. There's going to always be people who value these assets based on their fundamental cash flows, their revenues, and so there'll be these similar to how ETH and Sol have that right now, and it's growing. Like similar for TIA, you'll have both sides to the. It's just a matter of like what is the speculative premium or the mimetic premium, and what is like the actual backed by fundamentals or revenue premium. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I apologize for the very predictive long-term questions, but thank you for taking a stab at it. And we had a great conversation about just the last year of Celestia, the growth of DA, the Celestia ecosystem, valuations, and more. So guys, thank you so much for joining.
Cheers.